Diablo 2 Resurrected Season 2 in patch 2.5 has brought forth a completely new meta within the game by enabling different types of elemental builds with the new item called Thunder Charms. And of the builds that these charms enable, perhaps ironically even, the Cold Sorceress is looking to be, and specifically the Blizzard Sorceress, is looking to be one of the most viable and powerful characters despite already being one of the best, especially ladder starting characters in the game. However, in this video I'm going to propose a completely different character and build that in my opinion can not only contend very well with the Cold Sorceress at ladder start and perhaps even exceed it in many different ways. And with that I present the Terror Zone Specialist, and it's also extremely good at farming basically any other endgame area even at the beginning of ladder without having to rely on Thunder Charms, this being one of the key points. The Hammerdin, but with a twist to be able to also do things like Uber Diablo and also be able to do Ubers should the need arises. Now my rationale for picking the Hammerdin, and especially as a casual player, meaning that you won't probably be farming super hardcore at the very start and will be gearing up slightly more slowly than say the hardcore player, is that you mostly won't even have to rely on having a Thunder Charm, which is something that will make a lot of the other more mid-game to late-game builds more viable, including the Blizzard Sorceress, if we're specifically talking about farming terror zones. So again, with the Hammerdin, you will be able to farm most or the vast majority of terror zones and be able to capitalize on Season 2's sort of rush to obtain Thunder Charms, with many people trying to get these charms and there being a high demand for them to be able to try out these different builds, with it being like the new piece of content with this patch, right? And a new sort of fresh type of thing that people sort of see as like a shining object, and hence theoretically making it the more valuable item to farm and focus on. So again, even as a casual player who, for example, doesn't have that much time at the very start of the ladder to farm up a whole bunch of other gear to then trade for a Thunder Charm, because again, most other builds won't be able to farm Terror Zones as reliably as a Hammerdin, at least until they get their own Thunder Charm, right? Or perhaps hybridize, which will definitely make the builds do less damage than a Hammerdin, or maybe if they play as a group, which, you know, definitely would probably be more optimal, but I'm mostly referring to playing solo or more casually here. So assuming, for example, if a lot of other players actually start with the Blizzard Sorceress, which has been really hyped up, but by starting as a Blizzard Sorceress, they won't be able to do Terror Zones as easily as you, right? And thus, this actually skews things in the Hammerdin's favor in terms of being able to obtain these really desirable, especially at the start, Thunder Charms to exchange for gear that, you know, the Blizzard Sorceresses can farm up, can only do the other parts of the game, and thus giving you the sort of value advantage because of this really high demand of the Thunder Charms and the fact that you are one of the few builds that can reliably and probably the most efficiently farm this up, and again get you a ton of value and efficiency by selling these Thunder Charms for other types of gear that you might need, for which you can probably trade a single Thunder Charm for a bunch of. Well, this is all in theory anyway, right? And if we look at some of the prices of Thunder Charms right now, some of them might be worth more than others. We'll see how it kind of normalizes, because with the first few days of the ladder, there was actually a critical bug where people were getting a ton more Thunder Charms than intended through, I believe, a Barbarian find item bug. But after that normalizes, and it has already been fixed, hopefully the prices of these Thunder Charms will go back up, at least somewhat, and then later on, if and when they do drop down a bit and normalize with some of the other gear, the beauty of having a Hammerdin is that you can pretty much pivot to doing any sort of content in the game, right? And by hybridizing into a bit of Fanaticism aura and Smite, you'll even be able to capitalize on Uber Diablo when that spawns, and then help people do Uber Diablo runs, or just farm up a bunch of Annihilus charms yourself super easily, by the way, with minimal gear, and also be able to do Ubers so that you be able to, you know, trade items or even Thunder Charms for keys and whatnot, or just be able to sell Uber runs that way. And personally, another thing that I really appreciate, and I imagine many other casual players might share the same sentiment as well, as this is something that probably is the reason why they're more of a casual player, and it's that as a Hammerdin or a character who can do these terror zones, that are the freshest piece of content, right? And that actually gives you a bit of variety in terms of the things you can do in the game and the places you can farm in the game, even to the point of being able to do like Ubers or hunt for a Diablo clone. By having this variety, I just feel like as a casual player, the game feels a lot more enjoyable, and every time you jump into a session, you can kind of do something different as well. And you also don't have to focus on, like, especially at ladder start with some of the other builds, just farming the same area or like boss over and over again, like Mephisto runs with like some sorceresses, or like doing the ancient tunnels over and over again, which in my opinion and personally can feel a little bit tedious and discouraging, especially at the start of the ladder, and you're not really getting any great GG drops from farming these areas. Whereas I feel like with the Terra Zones, at least you'll have something a bit more consistent, and especially with like the increased experience boosts, you'll also be progressing your character a bit faster in terms of levels at least. So that's just something that I personally like, and it's also why the Hammerdin is my personal choice. But of course, you might actually prefer the Sorceress or any other class. It really comes down to what you have, you know, the most fun with, I suppose, and it's still viable to play as any other class anyway, especially if it's something that you prefer. But with that, I do want to do, first of all, a quick comparison with the Sorceress, especially the Cold Sorceress, and also give more rationale to why I like the Hammerdin. So with the Sorceress, you will get access to early teleport. The Hammerdin can only, or any other class in fact, can only get access to it with the Enigma rune word, right? But I feel like with Terra Zones and the Terra Zone meta, if it does indeed, you know, stay as the meta for a while, and with the higher item levels and Thunder Charms dropping, right? Teleport, I believe, is not that big of a deal in this meta. And this is because a lot of the Terra Zones you'll find that are actually just next to the waypoint. And in terms of playstyle, you're mostly looking around for like champion packs and just killing monsters in general. So this actually emphasizes a lot of just running around and killing monsters, and doesn't have to necessitate teleporting around as much, because you'll just be spending your time more on doing the actual killing, right? Plus, with the accessibility with a lot of these Terra Zones being next to waypoints or close to waypoints, you also don't have to do as much traveling. And even if you do, the Paladin still has Vigor, which is actually a synergy for Blessed Hammer. If you max it out, you'll be running really quickly, and with Charge, you'll be getting around fairly quickly anyway. And another thing that the Hammerdin has over the Sorceress is, again, at least before getting their Thunder Charm, that Hammerdins can farm most Terra Zones pretty comfortably, and Sorceresses have to actually hybridize into dual elements to be able to do them more reliably. Although, again, by hybridizing, their damage output will be reduced per element because they'll be spreading their points further apart. And thus, unless you're getting help or donations or something, the Sorceress without the Thunder Charm is only relegated to be able to do the old traditional Diablo 2 farms at the beginning, right? Be it Mephisto or whatever like other old run like ancient tunnels for cold sorceresses, or even like Act 1 Andariel and things like that, which in my opinion, for people who have been playing D2 for a long time and want some kind of change, and especially like a different thing to do within the game, which again is my preference, but I also think is going to be the preference of a lot of other, especially more casual players as well, they would want to prefer doing the Terra Zones from the get-go instead of going back to, despite this being a new patch with new content, doing these old farms over and over again. And another edge that the Hammerdin, specifically the hybrid Hammerdin that also specs into a bit of Smite and Holy Shield and Fanaticism, has over the Sorceress is that with some mostly pretty basic and cheap gear, it can actually do Uber Diablo, which is Diablo clone, and also Ubers in general for the Hellfire Torch fairly easily. Now, if you're interested in how to do Ubers and what it takes, I do have a video on my channel where I recorded live, or actually went live on YouTube doing a run with pretty minimal gear, killing Ubers and also the mini Ubers. So you can check that out, or there are lots of other guides on YouTube of people doing them with, again, not the best gear as well, right? Obviously, it'll be easier if your gear gets better. As you can see, I died here, but even if you do die, sometimes you do get a bit unlucky, but you can just relog and try again, and usually it'll turn out just fine, right? You just might need a little bit of practice and preparation beforehand. Now as for Diablo clone, that's actually much easier with some crushing blow gear, and fortunately nowadays it's actually a lot more common to see Uber Diablo spawn, and there are even websites like the Diablo clone tracker. You can also use Discord to track them whenever it spawns, and even have the website notify you on your browser or like through Discord as well when Diablo will walk the earth, so to speak, right? Or alternatively, you can actually use Discord channels like Mr. Llama SC's Discord channel right here to seek help for Diablo clone if you don't necessarily have the gear just yet. Or you can even become a clone killer yourself and help other people kill them, and who knows, you might actually get tips for that. Or if not the best charms drop, people might actually give them to you or whatever, right? So it'll just be a good thing to be able to do, in my opinion. Now, before I move into a quick overview of the Paladin build and gear, here I also want to point out yet another helpful website called the Terror Tracker, which is basically a website that tells you which terror zone is currently live. So if you want, you can actually pick and choose which terror zones to tune into. For example, if you don't want to play Diablo 2, you know, all day long or whatever, you can actually choose the best terror zones to just jump into the game for. Plus, on the website, people also endorse their favorite terror zones. Not as many users have done that just yet, but eventually you'll see which terror zones have the most endorsements, meaning that these are going to usually be the most efficient and best terror zones to farm, and then you can even choose to focus on those as well. Now for a quick overview of the Paladin Hammerdin Hybrid Smiter, it's pretty standard. Basically, I just maxed Blessed Hammer and all of its synergies, including Concentration Aura, which is the aura that actually boosts the damage of hammers or blessed hammers. So the synergies are going to be Blessed Aim and Vigor, so you definitely want to max those. And then for your offensive auras, you also want to max, again, Concentration Aura, which is the aura you want to have active, besides Vigor, which will help you run fast. Concentration is the one that gives the extra damage, although it's not a synergy, to Blessed Hammer. And then you also want to put 1 point at least into Fanaticism for the extra attack speed for smiting enemies down to help you proc Life Leech and Crushing Blow to help you survive as well. And then definitely you already have the 1 point in Smite and Charge and Holy Shield. Personally, I like to prefer dumping the rest of my points into Holy Shield. But it's up to you what you want to do. If you want to put a little bit of extra maximum lightning resist, you can also put some points into that. But generally, I think maxing Holy Shield is probably your best bet because it reduces the amount of dexterity you'll need to max out your block chance, which can be pretty helpful as well. Now, as for stats, again, it's very standard as well. You basically just want to pump enough strength to be able to minimally wear your gear, right? And then put enough dexterity, again, which actually has to trickle in as you level up as well, to max out your block chance with Holy Shield active, and then you can pretty much just put the rest into Vitality. So you definitely also want to save a couple of points per, level up for dexterity in case your block chance drops slightly when you level up. And as for strength, generally you don't need as much as you see here. It's because I don't have the Herald of Zakarum shield. I'm using a Spirit shield instead, which is still viable, right? In a Paladin shield, the Spirit rune word that is. But basically, if you're using like a Herald of Zakarum or Enigma and an Archon plate, you probably just need like 80 strength or something like that, right? And you can always respec as you get more gear and things like Hellfire Torches or Nihilist Charms, which will help boost your base stats as well. And next for gear, at least for the Hammerdin part of your gear, which means you will have ideally a separate set of gear for when you're doing the smiting with Ubers and Diablo clone. Basically, for the Hammerdin part of it, you just want to maximize the number of plus skills, right? And also have enough faster cast rate to be able to hit your Blessed Hammer and eventually teleport Breakpoint at 75 faster cast rate with medium gear, and eventually you want to try to get to 125 faster cast rate with more endgame gear. And with faster hit recovery, that can be pretty useful as well, although it's not really mandatory. You just want to have at least 48%. And by the way, the gear I'm showing you here is not quite optimal for Blessed Hammer because I do largely still have a lot of Smiter gear equipped because this Paladin was originally meant to be a Smiter. But even with things like Dracul's Grasp and Gore Riders equipped, as a primarily Hammerdin, I'm still able to do decent damage with my hammers in terror zones. But ideally you do want to have, again, 2 sets of gear for your weapon and shield. Especially when starting out, you can definitely just go for the spirit rune words, right? And put spirit in a paladin shield. It's gonna make you super tanky. And then for the smiter gear, you can start with the black rune word as a weapon. Here I have more high-end gear, exile as my shield, but you can still use the same spirit shield for smiting as well. Because again of the high defenses that it gives you, and the fact that the damage from the shield doesn't really matter, the raw damage itself doesn't really matter. Other helpful pieces of gear for, you know, Ubers is covered in a lot of other guides online, including my other alternative ladder start video that I'll link below. It largely covers some of the basic gear one would need as a starting out smiter on ladder. So things like treachery, again, black rune word, goblin toes can be really helpful. And with that, you'll have kind of 2 sets of gear you're working towards, prioritizing probably the Hammerdin part, especially since the smiter part is actually going to be fairly cheap to obtain anyway. But it sort of depends on what you want to prioritize and do more of. And for some additional information about the Hammerdin, should you desire it, especially this Hammerdin variant with Smite, I'll actually link another guide by another YouTuber called WithNoFiller. His Hammerdin guide is probably the best, one of the best, if not the best I've seen, and it's extremely detailed, and also covers like things like niche gear choices or like intermediate early game gear choices and things like that, other advanced strategies for the Hammerdin. So I highly recommend watching that video if you're going to be going with the Hammerdin, and I'll link the link for that video in the description as well. And with that, that is pretty much all I want to cover in today's video. Again, this guide and preference is mainly for solo ladder play. If you're going to be playing as a group, definitely other builds can be even more viable sometimes, like if you're going to be using Conviction Aura with the Fist of Heaven's Paladin, for instance, and playing with your friends for the most part. But the reason I prefer, again, the Hammerdin over that build, for instance, is that it can't really farm terror zones, right? But anyhow, thank you so much for watching this video. Like the video if you liked it or found it helpful, and also leave a comment below should you have anything to add. Maybe I missed something, or if you have some additional tips to contribute as well. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Happy hunting and peace.